I've always been driven by the belief that business is the most powerful vehicle of change we have at our disposal. And businesses in just about every sector are attracting customers because they successfully balance purpose and profit. Because they, like me, believe the world needs to transition to a kinder economy. And in a market where customers are making more informed decisions about how and where they spend their money, now more than ever, businesses must reevaluate what their license to operate really is. I'm Nick Hunter, CEO and founder of B Corp creative agency Paper Moose. And for years, I've been obsessed with navigating that perfect balance between purpose and profit. We call it the mucky middle. Welcome to my podcast, where I chat with successful business leaders about how they navigate the challenges that come with finding their own balance, and hopefully learn how to be a better and more conscious business owner along the way. In this episode, I talked to Margy Vary, CMO of The Conversation, about her love of advertising and driving growth in purpose-driven organizations. This is The Mucky Middle. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What did you want to be when you grew up when you were a kid?
Seriously?
Seriously, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't remember having a career path set in mind that I was stuck to, but I do remember at various stages I had different dreams, and one of them was to be a dentist. I don't know why. I think it was because I knew I had an auntie who was a dentist and she was terribly glamorous, and so I just associated being a dentist with being glamorous. But another one I think for quite a while I really wanted to be an interior designer, and I've got very, very close to doing architecture as a degree. In fact, I was all lined up to go to Cambridge to do architecture. And then I had a moment where I actually ended up on a train to Manchester University to go to an open day, and we started drinking cider on the train. Got to Manchester, I was quite drunk by the time I went into this lecture, and I just happened to go into the English literature lecture, and it blew my mind. They were talking about feminism, about Marxism, about postmodernism, it's sort of Germaine Greer territory. And I was so fired up, and I came out going, right, that's it. I'm going to go to Manchester. I'm going to do English. I want to, change the world. And
wow, one lecture.
And a few ciders.
That's all it takes. Yeah.
But it was more than that. It was because I grew up in the establishment. I went to this really old school boarding school. It was very academic. My parents were in the military. I come from a British military family. My mother actually worked for the Queen for a bit. So they were all like monarchists and conservative and duty. It was all duty and everything. And I was sort of brought up in this system, going to boarding school, I was very academic. I actually just rebelled against all of that. And I think it was because I was really lucky when I was at boarding school. I met a girl who lived in Kolkata because her dad was a diplomat there. And one summer she invited me to go and stay with her. And so I was there in Kolkata with this diplomatic family. So we're going to these posh clubs, and the segregation was just shocking. And it turned out we had a driver who was driving us around. Turned out that he was part of a terrorist organization. Yeah, I mean, it was quite a dangerous situation.
You found that out later?
Later, yeah. And he sort of started taking us to places that we weren't asking to go. And I think it was to try and show us reality. So he took us to the meat market. We saw, orphans on the street. We saw some terrible things.
When you were 15?
Yeah. Kids that were being deliberately maimed and harmed so that they could then make more money out of begging. And I tried giving kids money, but then they would get mugged. That was a massive wake-up call for me, is that whole thing about philanthropy. You can't just sort of give money and then not be responsible for the outcome of what happens. As you have to actually understand the system as a whole. I think that's why I started to question everything, and that's why when I got to Manchester and I listened to this lecturer sort of breaking apart and deconstructing everything that I had assumed to be true up until then, I just thought that's the one thing for me. I ended up doing English literature, and I still love writing. I think that's why I've now come back to working in media, because I love the power of words. And then that also drew me into advertising, because I think the beauty of advertising is that you can distill an idea and a psychology and a message down to, 3 or 4 words. When you hit that really powerfully, it's so satisfying. Isn't
it's very magic.
Yeah, total magic.
So yes, so your bubble got burst, and you started doing English literature in Manchester. What was the thing that made you fall in love with journalism in particular?
Well, actually, I think English literature made me realise I didn't want to be a journalist.
Okay. Yep.
Because writing to a deadline. I mean, I my favourite quotes about deadlines is from Douglas Adams, who said, "I love the sound of deadlines. I love the whoosh noise that they make as they go past."
Yeah.
And I realised that I didn't actually enjoy. I didn't enjoy the writing to, when you had to write an essay and constantly deliver. I realised that being a journalist is actually really hard. I enjoy writing and I enjoy the process of research, but I couldn't do that every day. But also, actually, I love maths as well. I really enjoy, I love data analytics. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
No.
I say that to my girls all the time. Maths is beautiful. There really is beauty, and I see patterns. And I think that that is also why I love design and architecture, because of the patterns. And when you see those patterns in maths as well, it's really exciting.
Isn't that true?
That's the other reason I went into advertising, because I was researching what careers can combine the beauty of words and language with statistics and mathematical analysis.
Art and science.
Art and science, yeah. And advertising was the thing that popped up. So that's where I ended up in an advertising agency in London. But obviously, the problem there is that the culture was quite toxic, as you can imagine. And it took me a while to realise...
I've never worked in another advertising agency other than here. So.
You haven't?
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was pulling beers before.
Oh, so you actually have no idea how important it is what you're doing here?
No, I have no idea.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I have an idea from what other people told me, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. I remember the lady who was the head of account management told me, she thought this was a useful and sensible, helpful advice. She said to me, if you're going to be a woman in this industry, you've got to make a choice. You're either one of the boys or you're a whore.
Jesus.
She said, you choose now.
Oh my God.
I know.
And you stayed in the industry?
I managed 4 years. Well, because what I realised is that you get an incredible grounding, and certainly at the big agencies, you get an incredible grounding in all different types of business and quite big business. And so you do get this extraordinary, deep, sudden insight into different, how the mechanics of different industries work and how different organisations can produce value, create value and drive profit, if that's their purpose. And then after 4 years, I thought that's enough. I'm done. I've learned that I've got a really good grounding in the basics.
Yeah, you learn your craft.
Now I want to take this and go and do something with it that I find more meaningful and actually suits my values more.
Which was?
Well, I came to Australia for a 3-week holiday and then just fell in love with it. I came here to visit a friend. She took me to Byron for a week, and then we went to Stradbroke Island, travelled up and down the coast and spent a bit of time in Sydney. And I think there was one point when I was standing in the ocean, actually at Stradbroke Island, waist deep in the water. And I got her to take a photo of me there, which I've still got on my wall at home, because that was the moment when I decided I was going to live in Australia. I was going to do whatever it takes to, get my visa, get a job, stay.
And so then you ended up at The Guardian, is that right?
Well, I actually found, cause I had to work in advertising when I got here, because that was what I had experience in. But I found somebody who was doing something really special and different in advertising, and that was Anthony Friedman, who, pretty much everybody in the industry knows was the CEO and chairman of Havas. He was just starting host at the time. And I just really luckily managed to get introduced to him through a mutual friend. And he laid out his vision for the agency to me. And I just thought, this is total genius. The concept of solving client problems without imposing your problems on the business transaction, I just thought was really clever. So I think the problem a lot of agencies were struggling with at the time is that you have to create profit, you have to use the teams and the resources that you've got effectively and efficiently. So if you've invested in certain creative teams or certain production resources or whatever, you have to use those, and then so you channel your solutions that you provide can offer to clients that are limited, determined by that. So his idea was just to deconstruct that model and just to pull in sort of freelancers, even creative teams, and that meant that when we spoke to clients about their problems, we could think much broader than just, we're going to make you an ad with this resource. We could say, well, let's just completely turn that on its head and think, well, actually, what's
going to be best?
Yeah, what you need is an in-store design. Let's go and find somebody.
Interesting. I didn't realize that that's how it started.
Yeah, it was very clever. And I mean, but it also, again, brilliant, but also slightly naive, because then he had to hire people like me. I turned up going, oh yeah, I've got experience in all sorts of industries and from all the different types of advertising. And he goes, oh, the first thing I had to do was design a loyalty program for Virgin Mobile. I go, I have no idea. No idea what I'm doing. So you had to learn very, very quickly and think on your feet.
I guess that's what we are in essence, creative problem solvers.
Yes, but they didn't teach me that in London. They taught me how to do all the things that, the disciplines.
The different tasks.
But how to think outside the box was not. You were sort of encouraged not to, in a way. You were like, you're not supposed to think. You're supposed to.
Do this brief. Execute on this.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Follow the process.
Yeah, I really struggle. And I find that of people coming from larger agencies is that breaking that kind of mindset. Because, we started as a production house and then became a creative agency. And so we have very much built from first principles in that way. So it comes naturally to me, but not naturally to everyone. So trying to get that mindset and trying to think like, well, what is the best solution for this client? Yeah, how can we execute on that and solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting when you do start to feel confident in that space. But to be able to feel confident in that space, you really have to understand how your client thinks, and you have to understand how your client's business really works and how they create value, and where you can then you have to really understand systems thinking. So you can look at their whole organization as a system and understand where you can interject or create an intervention that will have the most impact. But the problem is that we don't teach. We hire young talent because it's cheap, but we don't teach people about business in enough detail or about systems thinking enough for them to be able to identify those opportunities for their clients. And often I found even, junior marketing people are not taught. They're taught marketing, but that's just within the discipline, not taught how to think outside that. And then,
or how that's driving value for the business. Or
how the CEO, they need to think about how the CEO thinks and how the CFO thinks and how procurement think and how HR think, because a lot of the stuff we do actually has an impact on internal staff engagement.
Yeah, and if you don't, then you're just considered part of the colouring in department, and that's
that's
not valuable for anyone.
Yeah. So it's taken me a long time in my career to get to understand all of that. But now I'm doing an MBA. It's sort of opening my mind and thinking, oh gosh, I wish I'd known all this earlier.
What are you doing the MBA on?
It's an MBA specialising in business for social and environmental impact. So I do all the core units. I have to learn the for-profit model, basic economics, accounting, finance, leadership, all the different types of leadership for different types of organisations. But then I'm specialise in how to build organisations specifically for social and environmental impact. So then you have to kind of shift your mindset into thinking about the purpose. Side of things. So.
Which is a great segue.
Yes.
Tell me about when did that little spark happen? When did you feel, because you were working in advertising and you were helping big commercial entities make more profit.
Yeah.
What was the thing that sort of made you feel like you needed to be more aligned to purpose-driven?
Well, partly it was meeting my husband, who's an environmental scientist, and just becoming aware of the looming disaster that we're all facing 20 years ago, at the point when people were still in huge denial and refusing to talk about it. And when you live with environmental scientists, you realise that it's incredibly stressful for them. They knew all along no one would listen to them. And so, and then I started working with the Sydney Morning Herald and the Sun Herald, and became aware of really the incredible imbalance of the conversation that's happening in the media here in Australia, particularly around this crisis. And that really worried me. But then I also had the extraordinary luck to work for Virgin. And you wouldn't think that Virgin was going to be part of this purpose journey, but Richard Branson actually had a moment. He told the story where he was in the bath and Al Gore phoned him up.
Oh my God.
I mean, Richard is a great storyteller, so nobody knows if this story is true or not, but it sounds good. Yeah. Al Gore phoned him up. It was when he was doing the Inconvenient Truth, and basically spent half an hour persuading Richard that he needed to use his influence to try to have a positive impact on the environment. And Richard came away from that and briefed all his businesses. He came to us and said, right, you need to do something about sustainability. You need a sustainability policy. I want the brand to be doing, a positive, being a positive and responsible corporate citizen, And so we developed a sort of 5-pillar strategy, and all the businesses tried to implement that. And it was ESG really, not just environmental sustainability, but
ESG before ESG came to
yeah. So we had a social strand to it, and protecting the staff, building community, and trying to have a more positive impact on the environment. And I was working for Virgin Atlantic, which it is an airline. We think it's one of the worst emitters of carbon in the industry that emits carbon. And one of the things we tried to do, because it was a private business, we didn't have shareholders, we were able to say, well, all the profits that we can drive, we're going to put into developing biofuels. So try and replace airline fuel with biofuel or create a mix or something. So we actually did the first test flight with a mix of normal fuel and biofuel, and it was a success. And we generated biofuel as a side product from a process that already existed. But the problem is scaling that up. So it actually hasn't really worked, hasn't worked yet. But it was very satisfying to know that that's what I was actually working for at that point. So
helping this massive business transition.
Yeah, and it was funny listening to your last podcast with the founder of Young Henry's, and he was talking about exactly the same thing, how he managed to find a sort of a side product in his process that helped another industry, and how galvanizing that was for all the staff.
Yeah.
Absolutely the same thing happened for us at Virgin. So that's really what set me on that path. And I thought, I really want to pursue this. But I still kept coming back to the problem with the media and the problem with the conversation. Like we couldn't drive demand from customers. So even though we would have sustainability messaging, there just wasn't the demand there in the broader public. They would just
that it was worthwhile, or
people weren't including it in their choices enough about when they were buying things, and that was because the media just weren't delivering the message clearly. And
it seems insane now.
It's getting confounded with politics.
Yeah.
And, the fossil fuel lobby was so powerful. So that's why when I saw the Guardian job, I jumped at the chance, because I just thought, right, this is where we can actually deal with the problem. And I think we did it very effectively. That was really exciting to be able to feel like we're actually generating content now that millions of Australians are reading, that told the story convincingly, powerfully, with evidence. And then you can understand why then I went to the conversation, because now we're actually at the point of getting that evidence, getting the evidence out to not just to the public, but to the Guardian. So they now republish articles from the conversation which have the actual scientific research in them and explained.
Can you tell me a little bit about setting up the Guardian in Australia as well? Like how was that? Because it's a very different business model as well from, I guess, traditional publishers.
Yeah, the Guardian is unique because it's owned by a trust. The editor 200 years ago, I think it was 200 years ago, did something very innovative and progressive, and handed over ownership of the paper to a trust, and that secured its independence in perpetuity. So no commercial influence or no editorial influence can actually change the direction of the Guardian. Only the trust. And it also gave it sort of financial security. So although we had to pay back the loan, we got a loan to set it up in Australia, and we had to pay back that loan. There was no shareholders we had to satisfy for quick short-term returns. So we were able to invest in building the product for long-term sustainable economics rather than short-term sort of accounting profit. And that was a wonderful experience. But it did mean that you had to make really responsible choices about where you're investing the money. We didn't have a huge amount of money. We had to be really lean and thoughtful and careful about which journalists you hired next, or where, if you spent any money on marketing, we had to be really careful that it was doing the right thing, and then it was all focused on building the brand trust. So we knew that we couldn't risk undermining the trust of the organisation, because otherwise we would just perpetuate the problems that were happening in the broader media environment.
And undo the larger mission.
Yeah. But the great thing about The Guardian is, because it's purpose-driven, it attracts people who are passionate about the purpose, and so you get so much out of people. It's not just a job, it's a life, really, and people give so much to it. I gave so many evenings, so many evenings. And so many, and we had to I tried to get into every event that we possibly could. I was just trying to get us, I guess the challenge with being a digital product is you don't have that on the ground presence. It's harder for people to make a connection through digital channels. And so we tried to be at events everywhere around the country, have a presence, and that's exhausting. It takes a lot of staff time, and people did burn out. So you have to try and work out how do you manage people, manage the burnout factor.
How did you manage that?
Well, I just tried to make work fun. I tried to have fun wherever possible. So for example, I had a cookie fund just to get my boss good. So I would just bribe people with biscuits. I mean, it's just little things like that. I would try and, whenever I needed somebody to do something that was perhaps above and beyond their everyday job, interrupting them or something, I would bribe them with something that I knew that would give them like a chocolate biscuit, simple as that. Or when we...
So every time you walked up to someone with a cookie, they knew something was coming?
Yeah, they knew that was my bribery biscuit. But, everyone loved the cookie.
Yeah.
Or when when COVID happened and we all switched to virtual meetings, I had to dial in. I would bring in objects to every virtual meeting. I do it as a little show and tell because my house is like a museum. My husband he's an ethno botanist, and he works with indigenous people, not just in Australia, around the world. And so he has this incredible collection of things that they've given him or things that he uses to demonstrate his science. At every meeting, I'll just pull out one object and go, guess what this is? And they'd have a little show and tell about, it'd be a dinosaur poo or, some incredible weapon that they use in Fiji to break people's necks or something.
My son's going through a massive dinosaur phase at the moment, so he'd love a dinosaur poo.
I don't know anybody who doesn't love dinosaur poo.
No.
It's amazing. It's millions of years old.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So building, I guess what were the challenges with starting? I mean, there were obviously massive power players in the Australian journalist space, and The Guardian coming in. What were the biggest challenges to sort of build the brand?
Well, the biggest challenge that we had at The Guardian was because it was perceived, its roots. There was an existing perception of The Guardian as a British paper. So not only did we have to overcome the Britishness, we also had to overcome the newspaperness because we were digital only and Australian. And so every single thing that we did and every message had to reinforce digital and Australian. And obviously that was hard for me being British. So I tried not to have a voice at all, but tried to make sure that everything that we did was working with Australian journalists, focusing on Australian subjects, getting to understand how Australians think and what their needs are and how we're serving those particularly local needs. And obviously having an editor like Lenore was just an absolute gift because she's so knowledgeable about Australian politics. She's one of the people who knows most about Australian politics in the country. She has a regular slot on Insiders. She's a brilliant speaker, really inspiring. We just knew as long as we could use, and there were so many journalists like that as well, just absolutely brilliant people. As long as we could use them and help support them to get their voices heard, we were onto a winner. So yeah, and luckily, because we had all the tech resources and the incredible production resources from the UK, we didn't have to worry about all the costs of setting and all the management of setting up the tech, which soaks up so much of your time when you're starting a business down here.
That makes sense. And so what have you imported into the conversation?
Well, what I've imported into the conversation is what I'm trying to do is bring in that the culture of test and learn, that agile culture of technology, because The Guardian was a pioneer in digital transformation. They went to Silicon Valley and studied how tech companies were working, and they implemented the culture of agile experimentation. And so I'm trying to bring that into the conversation. So we're also trying to be more agile and experimental. At the same time, the conversation is incredibly risk averse because we understand that trust is so important, especially when you're claiming to be the source of the best quality information. You can't really just take a punt or take a risk or whatever. You have to be 100% sure that what you're doing is delivering best quality information the best way and building the trust. but that still behind that, you can have a process of the technology can be developed and evolved in a way that is more experimental. And so that's what we're really good at The Guardian, and that's what we're trying to do at the Conversation.
It must be very different moving from, because it's a much smaller organisation.
Yeah, much smaller. Well, The Guardian Australia was quite small. When I left 3 years ago, there were only 150 people. Now it's grown since with the Google and Facebook money, but the broader organisation in the UK was much, much bigger.
Yeah.
But the Conversation has 9 editions around the world.
Yeah, right.
So it's a bigger network, because The Guardian was only in 3 markets. We're in 9 now, but far fewer people. Like, we've only got a much, much smaller engineering team. And so we're much more restricted about what we can do. But at the same time, that's the small size means that you can be actually more experimental in the messaging. Ironically, I was very restricted at The Guardian about what I could say, from what we could do from an advertising point of view, because everything had to be signed off by the UK. And, there's a huge legacy of brand messaging, and there's so many multiple stakeholders. It took ages to get anything approved. Whereas at The Conversation, if I read the reader survey, I've just finished my reader survey. If I read the reader survey results next week and some brilliant insight comes out, literally within 2 weeks, I can have made an ad from that insight and put it up on Facebook and be testing it.
Yep.
And that is the thing that I absolutely love from an advertising point of view. You can be much more experimental in that respect. So I'm really enjoying that.
And most of the advertising is in the digital space?
Yes, we have done some poster campaigns in the past, but it's very hard to measure. And when you've only got a little bit of money, and when your product is online, and also it's not just that our product is online, but the main problem is online. The problem of misinformation, and the problem that we're trying to overcome, we're trying to help people with, is teaching people to seek out better quality sources of information rather than getting their knowledge from influencers. Where when you follow the money trail, there's a not necessarily helpful reason why they're getting that information. So we need to kind of be in that digital space, because that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And so that's why it makes sense for the advertising to be there as well. And then just also obviously the data and the analytics that you can get from it is unbeatable. So I can test, and I don't have to go through that incredibly difficult, rigorous process that we used to go through in advertising, where you'd have to do your market, you do your research, your planning and everything, and then you try and narrow down to one proposition, and then you try and sell that in, and it would take forever and ever and ever. It'd take you a year just to develop one ad. Now you can pop it on Facebook and see how it performs.
Yeah, this resonated. Let's blow it up.
Let's build on that, so you can develop several propositions, try them out, see which works. And so I'm loving that.
And so tackling misinformation, like the current campaigns that are running at the moment, there's so much misinformation happening around, like the No campaign. And what is the solution there? How do we tackle something like that? That's a big question, I know.
Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about this a lot, because we are really focusing on the supply side. Our whole business is focused on supplying better quality information and trying to deal with how we get that information out of the academic sphere into articles that are available for public. But the problem that we have is not on the supply side, it's on the demand side. How do we unlock the demand? And that's the challenge that I'm trying to think about at the moment, is how do you explain to people the damaging effect of not checking the sources of their information. I have this with my teenage girls. How do I explain to them that the TikTok influencer that they're following is not telling them something that's actually beneficial for them, because it's done so brilliantly to convince them that they do care about them. They genuinely think these people care about them. They don't realize that these people are actually just doing the thing to make the money. That there's, it's not a social impact model.
No.
But how do we explain that to people? And how do you unlock the demand and make science great again? How do you make people want evidence rather than opinion? And then also deliver it in a way that can be optimized by the algorithms. That's the real challenge, because if we want to deliver it in a way that's going to be optimized by the algorithms, we have to mimic the influencers, right? And then you're actually compounding the problem, because by mimicking the influencers.
But I guess if you're mimicking the influencers but doing it with the truth and facts, then maybe
That's the sweet spot. So I don't think we've found that yet, but if we can. Because, ideally our influencers should be the academics. Our decisions should be influenced by the
you need to persuade the academics to jump on TikTok.
Well, yeah, that's something that I'm trying to figure out how to make them. But how to make them? How can you then create content that's going to be as viral and shareable, or that TikTok will surface? Because they're obviously the reason people are choosing influencers, because they're not the establishment. They're not the
people like me.
The academic.
They see themselves in these people, and so you need to, or just get more academics that are younger and
train them and
train them.
Be influencers. Yeah. I mean, some scientists are just brilliant influencers, aren't they? But if we can do more of that, that would be great. But the other thing is, I mean, the people don't really realize how much misinformation they're getting through the digital sphere. So, for example, like we were just talking this morning about how the calendar invite popped up for this meeting, and it had my Guardian address, and you said, that's because Google's AI is sourcing information, surfacing it. So we don't even realize how much information being served to us is actually not accurate because it's come through AI. But we did do some research, and our editor, Misha, did a talk recently about AI and how the sources that a lot of the generative AIs are drawing on, some of them are incredibly untrustworthy, but the conversation is up there as one of the main sources in the world that's being drawn on for providing information. And at a time when most other media organizations are trying to lock down and protect their IP because that is the value that they deliver and that they can monetize, they're locking that down and preventing AI from calling it. We're currently saying, actually, we're open to...
Please crawl us.
Yes, because our social impact business model is built on the scaling of information through dissemination, and through our franchise model of all the other organizations, but publishing through Creative Commons and giving out the content for free so that everybody has access to it. That actually is what drives the revenue that we get from the universities, because they want their research out there. But the challenge with that model is that there's obviously a huge dilution of the brand. So that comes back to the marketing, is then how do you protect and maintain and build a brand if your social impact business model is built on dissemination? I think it's an interesting, exciting challenge to think about. Is what's the role of brand in that, in that dynamic?
Yeah, when you are in service to a much broader thing, it's not really about the conversation's brand in that way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're just the sort of channel. Yeah. But at the same time, the conversation's brand is essential because that's the trust mark that says to people, that's a shortcut that says to people, I can trust this information. Yeah, so I still have to build that brand so that when people see this information came from this article, came from the conversation, whatever, they know that's okay. I can trust it. And I've been having a lot of fun dealing with that, particularly in the advertising sphere, because one thing that I've always wanted to do with advertising, and this came back to the work that I was doing at Host and also working with One Green Bean. I was the founding client for Anthony's PR agency, One Green Bean, who were great at delivering acts rather than ads. That's the thing I loved about them. And I've always wanted to do more of that, where the medium and the message actually also deliver the purpose. Yeah. So I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some great examples, like I thought the Palau Pledge was a brilliant example of this. But there's so many great examples of people. And so I've started trying to do that with the conversation. We now have our Facebook direct response ads. I'm also trying to use that to build the brand. So not only are they trying to get people to sign up for the newsletter, lead gen, I'm also trying to get them to build the brand through the process of actually delivering information. So within the ads, just by reading the ad, you actually get a really important piece of information.
Awesome.
So, for example, they say things, and I'm using information that's not too serious. I mean, a lot of the stuff we tackle is the really big, wicked problems like climate change or the yes/no referendum, etc. But I think that it's a little bit crass to use to try and distill those down into one ad. I saw an Uber Eats ad on the way here that had a yes, no, and I thought,
that's very tone deaf.
I didn't really feel comfortable with that at all. So I'm using content that's more about everyday decisions, like should you wear shoes in the house, or what time should you go to bed, or should you wash your rice before cooking? I mean, these are things that genuinely you need to know.
Should I?
Well, go and look at our ad. And so I've been creating ads that ask those questions and then deliver the answer in a simple way. But the answer has clearly come from the academic. So we featured the academic. We tell you the university where the research happened. So if you want to, you can actually go and find out, and then just give you the very quick answer. But you have to interact with the ad to do it. And I was a bit nervous about doing this. I thought people aren't going to swipe through ads. It's, that's asking
like
a
a carousel.
Yeah, it's a carousel.
Yep.
But actually, they've been delivering lower cost per lead than the static.
There you go. Engagement.
Engagement, but also utility. Like you're actually solving problems for people.
No one wants to be advertised to. I want utility, or I want entertainment generally.
Exactly.
So,
And entertainment is much easier. Obviously, if you, as a creative, it's easier to entertain than it is to help people. But our brand is all about helping people. So that's what I want to do. Do more of that.
Well, AI piece, is that a big concern?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's
has opportunity, but also massive problems.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can understand why a lot of major organizations are locking their content. It's a moral and ethical dilemma because you don't want to be the one spoiling it for everybody else. But at the same time, we have to think about our purpose and mission. But if you can use AI to speed up your operations, and then that increases your social impact, that's a good thing. But we have to think bigger than that and think, well, what's the long-term impact here? So,
well, the unintended effects of scraping the wrong piece of information, or
I think but in a way it's also creating a crisis that actually is everybody's aware of, and so it's actually bringing to the front of everybody's minds the crisis of misinformation and the importance. So when I was talking earlier about unlocking demand, in a way, this AI crisis that we're now facing is helping to unlock that demand for better quality information.
Shine a spotlight on it.
Yeah, so like in everything, we know where there's a trend in consumer behaviour, you also get a counter trend. So what I'm hoping is there will be a counter trend towards people more actively seeking out better quality sources of information. But it'll probably take a while for that shift to happen. We're still all currently flirting with it and excited about it.
Yeah.
But hopefully,
I think when everyone gets sick of these very generic posts being, in their LinkedIn.
I've already seen it in my study at university. We used to have because a lot of it is virtual, we do it all online, and we used to have these quite interesting discussions in the forums where people would post about a topic and then you'd respond, and that's part of the coursework that you have to do. And just over the course of this last year, I've noticed so much of that discussion is now people have just put into ChatGPT, and then it's going here. Basically, all they do is reframe the problem or the topic in a AI style way, and it really deteriorates the enjoyment of the conversation. I mean, maybe it's factually correct, maybe it's ticking the rubric,
but from an engagement point of view,
so dull.
What are you learning there as well?
Yeah. And my one of my fellow students, she got into trouble recently because she had been using ChatGPT as an initial starting point for a lot of things, or had been reading a lot of these posts from people. She had sort of got that into her mindset as that's the way that you're supposed to write. And so she actually wrote her latest essay without using ChatGPT, but she was marked down for using ChatGPT because her grammatical, her style, her written style.
She'd adopted ChatGPT.
She had adopted the written style.
Wow.
Like, oh my God, it's actually infected the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so now I'm thinking, okay, well, what we need to be is more human. Whereas before, to build trust and everything, you had to be almost sort of mechanical in your scientific communication to make sure that you weren't injecting with opinion or bias or everything. And now I'm thinking, actually, we need to inject that human voice to make it clear that it's come from...
Yeah, I'm almost looking for like little mistakes or little grammatical errors now in people's writing. It's like, oh, that's a human. Like, that mistake shows that you're real.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it?
So, yeah, it's interesting. You want almost these slightly blemished conversations now.
Yeah, or just the wonderful, the beautiful quirks of language, the euphemisms, the flower, the flavour and the joy that we have from people inventing words and saying things in
Yes, people's personality.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really, you can instantly tell when someone's written something because it just lacks that little spark of human ingenuity, I think. It's kind of a little bit beige, which is terrifying.
Terrifying, but also then great for the creative industry because
I don't think we're out of a job just yet.
No.
Going back to, I guess, brand building and talking about, building purpose-driven brands, where do you think a lot of people get it wrong?
Well, this is the obvious answer that has been spoken about so much, that when you don't, when purpose is just an add-on. So when you look across the spectrum of purpose, it's first of all, the term purpose is incredibly unhelpful because profit is a purpose. A brand that's purely designed to deliver profit for its shareholders is delivering on its.
Well, my purpose might be to extract as much minerals out of the ground as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but for the purpose of making profit.
Money.
Yeah. That's Alan Joyce, great example. He delivered profit to his shareholders.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been his only purpose, but. If it was, he did his job.
Yeah.
I think one of the places we get it wrong is just saying the word purpose.
Yeah.
A lot of people would agree with that. But also they're not clearly defining what that means and how you create value. And they're not building that into the actual the whole production of what you do. So you can't just create value and profit through a process that isn't innately purpose-driven and then add on a purpose at the end. You have to try and build the benefit, the positive benefit into the model from the start to be able to talk about it. And that's really hard. That's why I get really excited about social enterprises. I know it's a very difficult business to be a social enterprise, but I love it when you find the sweet spot where solving the social environmental problem actually is the thing that delivers the profit, which then you can put back into the.
Well, you don't have those two competing things at that point.
Yeah, you've got one unified strategy, which delivers both of your objectives. And also, I think the great thing about social enterprise model is you can lean into the for-profit model in your management and operational side to create those efficiencies, but then you can lean into the not-for-profit model for governance, for building the integrity and the impact. So you get to draw on the benefits of both worlds. Whereas I think a lot of the time with if you're just purely purpose-driven, not-for-profit, you quite often lose the management operational benefits of a profit-driven model because you're perhaps not as disciplined or experienced or
that's interesting.
And making those decisions.
Going back to Joyce, I mean, from a lot of points of view, he has been quite successful in driving value for the shareholders. But I guess it's almost talking about, do commercial entities like that? What is the future for businesses like that? Because that whole model is his KPI is to drive shareholder value, not.
Yes, but there's shareholder value and there's short-term shareholder profits and there's long-term. I mean, his job should really be building long-term economic sustainable profits and communicating clearly to the shareholders how his decisions that he's making, which may be delivering short-term profits, are actually the risk, the cost of the risk of the long-term sustainable profit, or the opportunity cost of what he's not, because he's not investing. What is he eroding? Yeah, what is he eroding? And perhaps, I mean, I'm not an expert on the Qantas situation, but perhaps he didn't clearly communicate that to the shareholders, and that's what you should do, really.
And so, building the conversation now, what is sort of like the next sort of what's on the roadmap?
Well, we've just launched in Brazil last week.
Okay. Yep.
And we're launching a global edition and a European edition. But mainly our biggest challenge is trying to overcome the decline in traffic from Google and Facebook, because obviously Google and Facebook are now deprioritizing news in their feeds. So not sending as much traffic. So our model, like all publishers, was built on a lot of the traffic being sent to us through those channels. And now we're seeing that decline. We have to think, well, how are we going to either change the way we value traffic, our impact. So not just measuring on the number of page views or number of supposedly people that have read an article, but the depth of engagement of the people that did. And then also what happened as a result of people reading it. So doing more, putting more emphasis on how the authors were then contacted by other media or contacted by policymakers, etc. And then that piece of information, or that may not have been read by millions of people, but the people that did read it actually were the main decision makers who were able to then affect positive change in policy because it was better informed.
How do you track that? How do you?
Yeah, that is challenging because you have to. It's all qualitative information. Yeah. People have to volunteer that information, so we have to create a very easy and simple system that makes it possible for them to tell us. And so we have to try and find if there's a combination of technology that can track how our content is being disseminated and picked up and then informing conversation. But with the the personal reports from authors about so-and-so contacted me, this happened. And so we've got to find a way of trying to inspire them, motivate them to keep giving us that information.
You can connect the dots.
Sorry?
So you can connect all the dots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's just a communication challenge. It's like they're busy. These guys are busy academics. They've written the article. It's been published. They've got the impact that they need. They've been invited to go to talk to conferences on the radio, whatever. Why would they bother then telling us, taking the time to then tell us that all of that has happened? So that's an interesting communication challenge I can imagine for an agency to think, well, how would we then inspire them to say, this is important, you're going to remember to do this bit as well?
Yeah, give us the shout out.
Yeah.
Particularly with the Guardian and that experience, like what has been your biggest learning in brand building and I guess remaining relevant to consumers?
Making sure that you have open dialogue with your readers and consumers, staying humble and asking for feedback and listening to it. And with The Guardian, the challenge there is particularly that you can't allow people to influence what you write. So it was getting the balance right between listening to eliciting feedback and listening, but not then being able to seem to be influenced by loud voices with certain agendas that might want you to have express certain opinions.
I can imagine.
It's a constant challenge because the loudest voices are not always the most useful. No. So it's how do you find making the effort to go and find out what everybody thinks, or who is not being served, who are the voices that are not getting amplified and not being heard, and trying to serve them, trying to understand them and serve them, and also give them a voice. And the good thing about The Guardian is just the process of doing that actually helped build the economic model, because when you can communicate to your readers that that's what you're doing, they then are inspired to fund you because they say, well, I've got a voice, I'm a privileged individual with a voice, but I want to help you, so I will donate to you so that you can help other people. You can listen and support and amplify other voices that aren't getting heard. So it was great to think in thinking in loops. I think is something that I'm trying to work on more, rather than just the funnel. Yeah. The attract, engage, convert, retain. Yeah. Obviously we think like that, but I'm trying to think more in a loop. How does that then self-generate an ongoing
cyclical?
Yeah, cyclical, or like a network effect.
Yeah, awesome. How are you trying to apply that at the moment?
Well, the ad is a good example where I'm not just trying to generate money to then spend on advertising to build awareness, but the advertising itself is also delivering the information that people will then maybe share.
Yes.
So that's a loop that I'm trying to establish. But also it's about advocacy. How do we get people, once you've got people in, how do you then try and encourage them to advocate and do that unlock demand side? So how do you try and explain the message of, so for example, the crisis of AI, so that people then talk about that, they spread the message of the problem that you're trying to solve, And then when people encounter the solution, it makes more sense, because it's often easier to create a loop around a problem than around a solution. People talk about problems a lot more, I think.
I mean, the discussion around climate change for the last 20 years is a good example of that. Been sort of focusing not so much on the solution or, throwing muck at each other.
Yeah.
Particularly in the politics.
Yeah, we've been arguing about whether the problem exists or not as a way of not having to deal with the
actual problem.
The challenge of the solutions.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, isn't it?
It is. Awesome, Margy. Well, I guess what advice would you give yourself at the beginning of your career? What if you had a little conversation with yourself now of the girl having ciders going to uni? What would you say?
Well, I think maybe trust your instinct, because I think I knew when I was in the advertising agency in London, and I sensed that the culture didn't sit with my values. But I thought I was the one with the problem. I kept thinking I'm not good enough, or I'm sort of weak in a way because I don't like the way this behaviour is that I'm seeing. And it made me not trust my own values, because I thought, oh, come on, grow up. This is a commercial world. You've got to, this is the world we live in. You've got to be tough. And if you want to get ahead, you've got to do what she says, like be one of the boys or be a whore. Like, you just got to bite the bullet and get on with it. And I would just say to myself, that's not right. There is another path.
Yeah.
And you will find the other path, and you will find when you go on that other path, you find that there's a gazillion other people who feel like you and are also trying to, change the system. But you don't find those people until you actually act in a way, because your actions are more visible. Till you act in a way that aligns with your values and people can see that, then they come to you. You can kind of create that network and you find the right people. So it's really just having the competence to take that step that aligns with your values and then find the people that are your allies.
I hope the industry has moved along a little bit from then. but yeah, find your people. Well, thank you very much for joining us in Paper Moose HQ in the bunker.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you everyone for listening to The Mucky Middle. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. And if you did, then drop us a review on iTunes or wherever you happen to be listening. We'll see you next month for another episode, but in the meantime, we hope you'll keep walking that fine line between profit and our planet.
The Mucky Middle is a Paper Moose production. Music by Caleb Jacobs.